Tonight, the top 10 events that prove Obama planned gun control way before the Sandy Hook tragedy.
Top 10 events that prove Obama planned gun control long before the Newtown tragedy. Numerous events throughout President Obama's first term have been patently exploited to destroy the Second Amendment, quote, under the radar. Now, of course, you remember the statements from then White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel, who said, never let a good crisis go to waste. There's a few variations. He also said, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste. Those are all on tape. And it's the classic Hegelian dialectic that if you cause the problem and provide the solution, you can move the country, the population towards any kind of controls you want. And the number one control that dictators and tyrants always want is gun control. Look at history. Governments have killed more people than any other unnatural cause of death, and they always do it with the disarmed population. That's called democide. You can look it up. It's an academic study. But I just wanted to go over 10 of the top examples that prove that the Newtown, Connecticut shooting massacre is not the reason we're seeing gun control. As tragic as it is to have little children shot down, that is not why we're seeing this stuff. The government could not move quickly enough to implement gun control just on the backs of that recent tragedy. They've been ramping this up throughout Obama's entire first term. I take you back to February of 2009 when Attorney General Eric Holder, at the very beginning of Obama's first term, openly announced that they were seeking a renewal of the assault weapons ban. The response to that was from White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel, who told him STFU, that's an expletive term, telling him to be quiet and shut up on gun control. It was reported in ABC News by Jake Tapper. They wanted to implement gun control slowly, incrementally, under the radar. They did not want an open call for gun control because they knew it would get the gun lobbies mounted up, working against that action agenda, and indeed, that's been what's happening. Then, of course, we lead into Fast and Furious, the covert program the government admittedly, overtly staged in order to ship or walk guns south of the border right into the hands of Mexican drug cartels. They admittedly put thousands of those guns into them just so they could demonize the Second Amendment, and specifically so they could add new restrictions to the importation, exportation of guns and try to rein in, quote, assault rifles or semi-automatic weapons. And of course, that's its whole own story, its own saga, its own scandal. But among other people, Attorney General Eric Holder was caught lying about what he knew and when. That all happened under congressional testimony. He claimed he only knew about it recently in the last few weeks during his May 3rd, 2011 testimony, yet it was proved through documents leaked through CBS News and others that he was briefed about it officially at least as early as July 2010. So that's another big gun control thing. Of course, there's a lot more to Fast and Furious, but we don't have time to get into it all. Then, tellingly, on January 6, 2011, very conspicuously, just 2 days before the Gabrielle Giffords shooting in Tucson, Arizona, we have the Reuters report expressing how the White House lamented that there were delays over their new ATF regulations that were going to rein in semi-automatic weapons and attempt to curb the shipping of weapons south, again tying into that Fast and Furious scandal. I've got a link to that Reuters report. People ought to save and archive that and talk about it. By July 2011, this led to new regulations in the 4 border states, that's California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. It required the more than 8,000 gun dealers in those states to report anyone buying more than 2 semi-automatic rifles, all while the government itself was giving those weapons directly to the drug cartels. How shameful is that? And they undoubtedly got those regulations put in place, not only on the backs of the whole Fast and Furious illegal weapons shipping scandal, but on the mass shootings in Tucson, though they were unrelated. Then, of course, on January 28th, 2 days after that report I referred to, there was the tragic shooting by the alleged killer, the confessed killer, Jared Lee Loughner, of Representative Gabrielle Giffords. She didn't die, of course, but many others did. Others were injured. That, of course, was its own big scandal. And there's all kinds of unanswered questions Does the profile of this guy add up? Were reports of possible second shooters or of handlers? Was there anything to any of that? Regardless, the media directly exploited it, demanded gun control. Publications like USA Today published the article the day after. Debate on gun control heats up after Gifford shooting. And you got to remember, it's always this quick response after these tragedies that's the giveaway. That's the tell in the poker game that they've been planning the response to these tragedies. And then you have people like the Southern Poverty Law Center, the sheriff of Pima County there in Tucson, Clarence Dupnick. They tried to blame the radical right wing. They tried to blame the violent rhetoric in the country and the political spheres, and tried to tell people that they had to tone down debate and be more bipartisan. Meanwhile, gun control advocates openly demanded Obama use the Tucson shooting for gun control, but he's smarter than that. He knows it has to be incremental. He knew it was not the time for overt moves. It just kind of did a generic rally for re-election and mourning for the people who were killed and injured in that attack. That brings us to point number 5 of these top 10 ways in which the Obama administration has always been pushing for greater gun control. That comes in March of 2011 when he told the Brady Center, Jim and Sarah Brady, in a private White House meeting that he was working under the radar. Quote, I just want you to know that we are working on it, gun control. We have to go through a few processes, but under the radar. That was, of course, reported in the Washington Post and other mainstream medias. That was what was reported, and you could see for yourself what the evidence was. Obama's been working under the radar. Then point 6, how the ATF tried to ban the importation of most shotguns. They tried to ban shotguns that hold more than 5 shells. That's most shotguns, people. Some of them only use 3. And they tried to ban the importation of weapons not used for, quote, sporting purposes. According to the NRA and AmmoLand and others, this was blocked through a congressional appropriations bill for fiscal year 2012 that banned any federal money going towards that purpose. But it nonetheless shows their intention. Point number 7, the Trayvon Martin shooting. I don't have to remind you, I would imagine, how much they exploited that shooting, not only for gun control, but to push those buttons with people along lines of racial division. We saw everybody line up. They showed the picture of the younger Trayvon Martin. Everybody came to the table arguing for all kinds of things. You had groups like that new Black Panther Party demanding blood in the street, while the supposed neo-Nazi groups were all mounting up to march. And of course, you had the mainstream media once again saying, is this the turning point on gun control? Is this the point where the debate turns in our favor? Again and again, you see this pattern of the media lined up to exploit these shootings. And of course, Obama went on in his press conference to say Trayvon Martin looked like the son he had never had, really just pushing people's buttons and again greasing the skids, not yet calling for outright gun control. Then, of course, you had the Batman shooting. I don't have to remind you how much they exploited that in the media, but again, it was this ramping up because 12 people were killed, 58 people were injured. He used, quote, assault weapons. How did this one guy get so many weapons in his arsenal? How did he get the body armor? How did he do these explosives in his apartment? Really, a lot of those questions were never properly answered. The police frequencies reported other shooting suspects. There's the reports that someone let him in through the back door and all kinds of other unanswered questions. But again, the media used it for one purpose, to show how a lone nut can really take over the country with a tragedy and how that somehow leads to gun control. And I go on to make the point that Obama, again, refused to pursue gun control. It's like that scene in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar where Caesar refuses the crown 3 times. No, I don't want to be emperor. No, thank you. I won't accept that title of emperor, until he finally does, of course, when the public outcry is strong enough, when everybody's behind him for that purpose. That takes us to the debates. Remember the debates with Mitt Romney? Obama was already the, quote, gun salesman of the year. That had been pointed out in the Washington Post, many other mainstream publications, because he spiked gun sales so much for people who were afraid he'd be reelected and restrict guns. Basically, everyone knew it was coming, but anyone who had any doubts and all those who were in denial could only look to the actual televised debates during the reelection campaign for Obama, where he said on TV TV that he wanted to renew the assault weapons ban. And then he went on to talk about how we don't need military weapons on the streets of America, and how really it wasn't just semi-automatic rifles, it was also these cheap handguns people were using in Chicago, where they already have gun control, which is also, by the way, the murder capital of the world. And as short as our memories are, I know most of you in the audience haven't forgotten about Bob Costas, but the tragedy over Newtown, the shooting in Connecticut, has been so tragic that I think a lot of people have already forgotten how much they tried to use the media to call for gun control since Obama's reelection, just after that tragic murder-suicide case with the NFL player Jovan Belcher, and how Bob Costas took his spot during halftime on the Monday night or Sunday night, whichever it was, football program, to repeat the writer Jason Whitlock's calls for gun control. He didn't apologize even after there was a major outcry. He went on to do other interviews and said things like young men can't be trusted with guns and they always do something dangerous. Something bad always happens when young people have guns. All this has just been greasing the skids for this total media frenzy we're seeing right now. Just never forget that these calls for gun control, which are bolstered by this manufactured public support for Obama's new gun control restrictions, have all been ramped up from these tragedies I just listed and many more. That's not even including coverage of the UN Small Arms Treaty and the many other ways they're trying to use regulations through the ATF and, frankly, other groups to kill the Second Amendment through a death by 1,000 cuts. The Second Amendment is precious. It's part of our Bill of Rights that's enshrining the rights of the individual, the rights of the state, buoying against the possible tyranny that comes to every government, holding back the federal government, not giving them total power. Those are the reasons we need to keep the Second Amendment. It has nothing to do with these terrible tragedies. Armed citizens will actually prevent most of those murders, and I linked to dozens of those cases as well. The NRA admits that 2 million crimes are prevented each year by guns. Gun Owners of America estimates 2.5 million. Even the Clinton Justice Department, who helped back the assault weapons ban, admit 1.5 million crimes are prevented every year by gun owners.